This is opening day at the CN Tower back in 1970s. Oh, there's me, 76. Well, I wasn't there that day, maybe, but it was all so exciting. Toronto not only got an iconic new building that day, tallest freestanding structure in the world, it also showed the world what Canada could do. CN Tower, the Halifax Shipyard, and the Vancouver SkyTrain. Landmarks that define Canadian cities, and they were all built by Canadian construction giant Aecon. You've probably seen their signs around some construction sites. Well, the Chinese government recently bought Aecon through a state-run corporation, which gives Beijing direct control over the company. It's not a private company, it's government-run, and they won't just own it. Aecon tells us that there will be a Communist Party unit inside the leadership structure to, quote, advise the board on national strategic opportunities. So exactly whose national strategic opportunities? Aecon also works on some strategic Canadian assets, like nuclear plants, essential for Canada's power supply. Prime Minister Trudeau has assured Canadians there's no reason to worry here, that the deal is under review.
We will look very, very carefully at security issues, at economic impacts, at whether or not this is truly in the national interest.
Because keep in mind, it's not just this one sale. Over the last decade, Chinese state-owned and some private companies have gobbled up key Canadian assets in oil and gas, in real estate, communications, and high tech.
This week, our Natural Resources Minister was in China looking to get China to invest in Canada's oil sands, telling them Canada's mind is open to the idea.
It looks like Chinese investors are getting even hungrier for property in Canada these days.
The federal government is under fire over proposed Chinese takeover of a Vancouver firm. Last week, the government said it would allow Chinese investors to buy the Canadian tech firm Norsat.
Some of those sales raise national security concerns from experts here and others outside of Canada. And remember, China is also suspected of a series of hacks, of cyber attacks on the Canadian government over the last few years. All of this presents a challenge to the Prime Minister as he pursues a free trade deal with China and access to a market of more than 1 billion people. But that's not gone so well lately. While Beijing was buying up Canada's companies, Trudeau came home from that free trade mission to China empty-handed.
Moving forward on a trade agreement with China is a big thing, not a small thing. Canadians understand how important it is to get it right.
So no free trade agreement yet. Plus, this recent Chinese buying spree. Is Canada giving up more than we're getting? And is Beijing's buying influence over Canada's politics and economy? Joining me now is Carleton University assistant professor and former national security analyst Stephanie Carver. So, Stephanie, I guess the big question is, should Canadians be worried?
I think they should. I mean, China's a country, we know they've engaged in what you call front door strategies, or very legitimate ways to take over companies or buy up assets in Canada. But China's also been known to use clandestine means, so whether through their state-owned enterprises or through cyber hacks, in order to get either intellectual property or control over assets that they see as strategic.
So it's not just business influence here, it's political influence.
There's also political influence as well. There's been numerous allegations of China engaging in what's known as clandestine foreign influence, which is actually one of the hardest things for national security agencies to track. But essentially, it's where China is trying to quell dissent. And there's been allegations that university students, for example, have been, their families have been called in China if they've been making critical remarks about China, as well as certain democracy activists have experienced harassment here in Canada as well.
Back to the business interests, there were concerns stated that the Chinese government company spent too much, that they overbid on Aecon. That skews things.
Right, and this is one of the larger national security concerns that we actually have in Canada, is that basically state-owned enterprises can come into our markets and they don't have to abide by the normal market practices of say a private sector company. So they can come in and bid however much they want for something they want to control, and they don't have to answer to shareholders or stakeholders, and then they can engage in these practices, which either then gives them control over, say, a certain sector, or perhaps can undermine other businesses in Canada in these areas as well.
You wrote a paper recently that gives an example of real hardball being played here at the University of Calgary, for example.
Yes, so a few years ago, at the University of Calgary, the Dalai Lama was invited, and China retaliated by essentially basically delisting Calgary as a recognized foreign accredited institution. And, you know, the University of Calgary at that time had about 600 students from China paying over $30,000 a year. So that's a considerable hit to their budget. So we know that China will retaliate in ways when things occur that they don't like.
And when there's trade talks happening, you said that there was a frivolous complaint made about Canadian canola.
Well, one of the things we often see, like right before a major leadership meeting between Canada and China, is they bring up the issue of canola, which is a major export to China. And so they'll basically say, oh, they have health concerns.
So it gives them leverage over the negotiations.
Absolutely.
So much complicated relationship, lots to watch there. Thanks so much, Stephanie.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.